Our next speaker today is Dr. Stephen Talbot. Dr. Stephen Talbot works with the human science discipline in the domains of social and organisational learning. Whilst at the Defence Science and Technology Organisation, he has examined issues relating to learning organisations, social and organisational learning, lesson capture and knowledge transfer. Stephen has a PhD in Sociology from Flinders University, and make him very welcome. Thank you very much.
All right, can I just start by thanking the applied sociology community, and Alan in particular, who's wandering over there in the background, for inviting me here today to share with you some of my experiences and thoughts as a sociologist working within a defence organisation. Hopefully what I have to say will strike a chord with some of you and help you in some way to prepare for life outside of the university as an employed or working sociologist. So I might have a couple of tricks of the trade to share with you. Right, now it's a click, isn't it? Great, that's my main concern, technology. You know, I work for a technology organisation, I'm a Luddite. Right, now a little bit about my background. I'm not just doing this to because I think I'm fascinating, you need to know all of my background. There's a point to it. I actually fell into sociology by accident. I'd never even heard of sociology when I embarked upon my university career. I actually blame my wife, who also is a sociologist. She encouraged me to enrol in sociology after attending one of those intro to sociology seminars they hold at universities, and by a member of the sociology department, who actually in this instance was Maria Zadarodny, who some of you may know in sociology of health and illness, who actually became my supervisor for both my honours and my PhD. Part of her spiel included all the different job opportunities that are available for sociologists upon completion of their degree, and Maria and both my wife were very convincing. I ended up enrolling in sociology, studying sociology at Flinders and trying to hone my research craft for several years, eventually becoming part of the teaching staff there. And as you can see, I developed an interest in sociology of health and illness with my honours thesis, and then gender and identity construction as part of my PhD. Now, I mention these that, you know, while they're my particular area of interest, my current work has nothing to do with any of these issues that closely anyway. I mean, you can stretch to make them relevant in some ways, but so my message is to become an employed sociologist. You actually need to be willing to look outside your own area of interest or expertise and be willing to take a bit of a risk and carve out a new research path. But one thing that held me in good stead is I did develop an interest in qualitative research, and that actually did prove useful when it came to my employment. So, you know, things were rolling along. I was considering my opportunities at Flinders. You know, as you're doing your PhD, I thought I'd better cover myself and perhaps sit the APS exam, and just in case you don't get your stipend and all those sorts of things as you're doing your PhD. And while I was there for a few years, I received an email from one of my colleagues saying that an organisation called DSTO were looking for a qualitative sociologist, of all things. So, being a good researcher, I googled DSTO, and I found out that they're a government research organisation whose client happens to be Defence. And I still thought I'd give it a go, even though I knew it was Defence, because I think, you know, historically sociologists have been quite sceptical or critical of defence institutions, and in turn defence institutions have been quite sceptical of sociologists and what they're about. So another lesson here is to become an employed sociologist, you need to be willing to look outside your conventional or preferred employment stream, as these can actually prove to be very rewarding. Right, so I can't see that on there, so I have to keep turning my head. All right, so I'll give you a very brief snapshot of my current research program, the area that I'm working in. Not just me singly, there's a team of people. The Australian Army identified a need to become more adaptive and organisationally agile in response to the changing external environment. And organisation agility, we would argue, actually becomes from their learning abilities, whether at individual, team and organisational levels. So we set up a research program to examine learning in the Army and to actually try and profile their learning culture using a variety of methods and across different levels and locations. As you can see, it's a 14 years, an ambitious program. I mean, given all the funding upheavals and stuff happening in defence at the moment, we may get to 2021, we may not. We have to, again, we are willing to rebadge ourselves and rebrand ourselves and evolve. But yes, we did a literature review. We found all these fascinating things about learning organisations, all of which are in corporations, not defence context. So then we tried to apply that in the defence setting, talked to stakeholder groups, found out what they felt was important, what did it mean to them, came up with some key definitions and principles which were embedded into their doctrine, so it became useful for them in a language which is useful for them. Rolled out a questionnaire a couple of years ago, had over 4,000 respondents, which enabled us to benchmark Army's learning capability. We plan to roll that out again next year, so now we'll have something to compare Army against in terms of those sort of things. We thought that's great. We satisfied the stats for the quantitative people who love that. You know, defence love numbers. But then we thought to embed that, we need to contextualise and involve the qualitative component. So we've just completed case study data collection a couple of months ago. So we had almost 40 focus groups with over 300, 400 personnel across Australia to start situating, embedding some of the quantitative data. And from that we developed a model, and it's an ongoing working process. That's all I can say about that. Sorry, otherwise I'll be here 20 minutes just talking about that alone. Here's the horrible build thing. Yes, fascinating. Another build, yes, which kind of just says what I did. Anyway, all right, looked at all those things. Okay, so what do I actually do? That's the research program, but what do I do? So yes, I go out into the field, I conduct research. As part of that, we need to conduct, create research proposals or research protocols, as we call them. It's not just that we can go out unfettered, we have to also negotiate access to personnel, seek permission, and we do that through things like direct liaison authorities, tasking orders and tasking statements and all those things, so we can get access to these personnel. And also we have to be able to get access to the sites. We have to organise point of contacts and point of contacts when people aren't there, because Army, they have posting cycles and people come and go every 2 or 3 years. So we have to do those sort of things, and of course we like to collect data, which is quite interesting within a defence context, because particularly with focus groups, you have to organise focus groups according to rank. I mean, you don't want to have a commanding officer in a group with privates and they'd be whinging about the commanding officer, so you have to be sensitive to those sorts of things. And also, this involves us talking to some of the commanding officers, whether beforehand, for them to get a sense of who we are. Are we some mad scientist boffin who are going to cause trouble? And then also after we've conducted research, we may have to go and talk to commanding officers to give them a quick back brief and some very quick analysis about what some of the issues that have come up. It also involves being enculturated in a sense. I mean, sometimes we stay in barracks, not all 5-star accommodation. We stay in barracks with wildlife creeping into the rooms. We have to. Sometimes we eat breakfast at the messes, officers' messes and things. So you get to meet a whole variety of personnel. You get to learn mess rules about me being told off for wearing jeans in a mess and have to put a collared shirt on, all those sorts of things. And of course then we do create reports and do analysis and write-up and those sort of things. So that's a very quick snapshot of the research practice that I do as a working sociologist. All these things are flashing at me, but I'll continue. But it's not all beer and skittles. My time isn't spent doing just purely research. As you progress through the organisation, you find that they hire you for your research capability, but then management and managerial overheads and all those sort of things start to encroach on some of that practice. We spend quite a bit of time bidding for funding. maintaining spends for area of work. That's very important within governmental sectors. We need to have the money to be able to travel to sites, to collect data. Have we got the equipment to collect the data, whether it means digital recorders, a whole variety of things? Do we have the software licenses and programs? We have to negotiate and organise those sorts of things, and funding approvals for transcription. So it involves that kind of stuff, also designing programs of work and co-designing the research program you just saw. I also have to make sure that I have staff to assist with the realisation of the research program and supervise them to make sure they're developing their skills. 5 minutes, Ashton, oh my God, all right. And attend wonderful meetings. Don't we love attending all those sorts of meetings? Right. Oh, 5 minutes, crikey. Right, areas where sociology can add value to defence. Okay, human system integration is quite an important area at the moment in terms of technology. There's a lot of acquisition of technologies and platforms and equipment and those sort of things, but paid people have to use them. So that's quite an important area. I have sociologist colleagues who work in the national security arena who are doing a bit of social modelling. And sociology has been in the military sociology in particular has been quite a well thought out area for some 50, 60 years in the US, and Australia's trying to catch up with that. Looking at things like group cohesion, teamwork, interactions, whether that's coalition, tri-service, those sorts of things. And my work falls under the cultural review and organisational design space. So there's actually quite a variety of areas that one can apply your sociological imagination to. How's that for a segue? I've got sociological imagination on the next slide. So the big thing is, how do we add value? It's okay that you're a sociologist, but you actually need to be applying your craft to add value to a particular organisation or a workplace. And we can do that through some of these things up here, whether it's your skill sets you have, your theoretical stances, your critical thinking skills, but it also actually is when you come into a workforce, work area like defence, it's an education process. They're not very familiar with sociology and sociologists and what they can do. There's some confusion that we're social workers, that we're automatically good with people, fascinated with people and they're solving their personal problems. I'm not particularly interested in people's personal problems, that's social work. So there's an education process that needs to go on, or they think you're so good with people that you can run a workshop or do things for them because you have a lot of introverted people. So it's about educating your peers and the client, ARMY in particular, about what sociology can bring. And that also entails talking about what a qualitative sociologist can do. And that actually is quite a rigorous undertaking. We are also concerned with reliability and validity and all those sorts of things. I'll have to race through this, sorry. Okay, why should I consider a position in defence? Well, for those reasons I mentioned earlier, there's a broad application basis. That said, we're going through a bit of a freeze at the moment in terms of hiring because of all the cuts. We have to cut $10 billion over the next 10 years. 2 minutes, okay. That said, there's wonderful opportunities to work alongside other people. We heard the multidisciplinary theme already mentioned this morning. I don't work with a bunch of sociologists. I work with organisational psychologists. We have physicists, we have chemists, the hard scientists, those sorts of people. So that's still a good opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to work alongside others, leverage off their skill sets. Relatively well resourced. Things were probably a little bit more resourced a few years back. There's always a captive sample population. Army people are there. You can grab them, figuratively grab them, and they're there for your research. You don't have to worry about getting your sample. Your research advice has to have an impact. That's the whole point. You've got to be doing something. You've got to be solving problems. You've got to actually help them identify problems. Sometimes people think they know the problem and that actually isn't really the problem. And I've also been involved in some of the conduct reviews, with regard to Skyping and all those sort of things. So there's great opportunities for international collaboration. I collaborate with people from Columbia University and various other people in the learning organisation area. But one thing I will say, and this is a bit of a bugbear for me, is that I think sociology could be a little bit more proactive in terms of thinking about placement opportunities, particularly for applied sociologists. I have a lot of organisational psychologists who come to our organisation for 60-day placements. I supervise organisation or psychologists. Sociology doesn't necessarily seem to have that mechanism to embed people into the organisations, to get them familiar with what it's like to work outside of the university, even if it's for a 60-day taster, to get them familiar with some of the skills and how they can apply their skills and do things. So I think that's something for the applied sociology and sociology in general to think about. Maybe a few lessons from the psychology department there, dare I say that. Challenges, I'm almost there. It's my last slide. Challenges. I'm able to publish externally, but most of my output is client-based and subject to restrictions upon release. So viewing is limited to an internal audience. We have to go through an internal vetting process before we can publish externally. So we go through a review internally to make sure that we're not spilling any beans and that it's good quality. And then we go through the external, so we get doubly reviewed before we do external publications. Defence owns my IP. The Commonwealth owns my IP. So I need to gain permission before I can publish or do anything with it. And sometimes that has to come from the chief, and I have to also get sometimes permission from Army itself before I can publish things. So there are those restrictions, and that's for unclassified material. So that can be a bit of a pain. I mean, it can take a bit of time, so it sort of delays when things can get out there. And that also has implications for collaboration opportunities, because there's a bit of a tug-of-war between universities because they like to own the IP versus the Commonwealth, who likes to own the IP. So we have those sorts of tug-of-war backwards and forwards. But luckily, I've still been able to collaborate with people from Monash and all over the place. Most academics are just happy to co-author and publish and those sort of things, and are willing to be quite agreeable. There's some of my recent publications to show you that we can publish. Those three are from this year alone. We have others in the works. As I said, it's not just me. There's a team of people who I work with.
I was just thinking about your PhD and gender identity, construction, etc. And I was thinking defence or the Army's, kind of Navy's cultural issues at the moment. Do you have any of those conversations around what research might be able to provide in that context, particularly at a point in time when there's change kind of promoted? Are those opportunities that you can take hold of? Or?
Yes, the Defence are currently going through a military sociology sort of phase, so I get invited to those sorts of things, and there's a big push for diversity within Defence at the moment, and some of you may have seen the policy changes in regards to women on the front line in terms of frontline combat roles, and of course that's going to present challenges to Army in particular. So I have some input into some of those discussions. As I said, I've participated in review process with regards to some things which have gone on within Defence. It's a very, Army in particular is a very sort of gendered institution, masculinist institution, so I think there's some challenges there with regard to behaviours and risk-taking practices and those sort of things. But in general, Defence are very open to an examination of those sort of issues, and they're trying to put their best foot forward in addressing those sorts of things. So yeah, I have some input into that, but my main focus is the organisational learning and organisational culture, which does overlap with some of those things that you're talking about in terms of the cultural review of Army.
As you already mentioned, the Army the defense force is worldwide. It's a masculine domain everywhere, and you have also worked in gender and identity construction. You have come from that research background. Then how you have mentioned some challenges as well. How challenging to work in this kind of domains, and obviously there might be very less number of women in senior position. I think everybody can guess, even saying the word view. So how you tackle in your research and also in your daily life? Of course, you also engage with a male researcher there and a female researcher, and how it works there.
I think, well, I actually work in a team of women. I'm the only male in my team. I have someone who's half sociologist, half org psychologist, and I work with org psychologists. I think the main issue is, in terms of cultural divides, if you like, is the scientist or civilian versus the defence realm, and some of those sort of issues. So, as I said, as part of the education process, we as sociologists and social scientists need to educate the defence realm about what we can provide, that we're not boffins or just geeks who come out there and interfere with their lives and over-survey them, because I always talk about survey fatigue, that too many surveys, you know. And I say, we're not that original, we're not that unique. I don't like surveys either. So it's mainly those sorts of discussions and how we can show that we add value. Defence wants to know how you can add value to something. It's not just worthwhile doing research for research sake. That said, the personnel are incredibly polite. When we have women come in for the focus groups to facilitate the focus group with mainly men, I mean, we have 10% females. Generally, they're very polite, very respectful. We can still establish egalitarian rapport, irrespective of rank or gender. So in that respect, there hasn't been that many issues or problems that come to my mind.
Other questions?
I was just wondering if you had a clear idea when you were doing your PhD, if you could foresee what you would do to earn a living in the future after the PhD. So I'm wondering how you made that transition from doing a PhD and leading to the PSTO, and how much of it was just pure luck or fate or serendipity.
It was all of those. I was, you know, as a part of the teaching staff through my PhD candidature, you know, so I did all the tutoring and guest lecturing and those sorts of things. And it was, at that stage, it was pretty tight, pretty hard to get a tenured position within the university, unless you waited for someone to fall off the perch, basically. So, and as I said, this email just crossed my path. Jason Pudsey, a colleague of mine at Flinders, said, hey, you know, this place called DSG, I want a qualitative sociologist. Are you willing to give it a go? And I thought, well, why not? I mean, at that stage, family planning was an issue with me and my wife. During my honours thesis, we had our first child, and the PhD, the second child. We had another child post that, 3 girls. And, you know, money was an issue. What do I do? What am I going to do? And I thought, why not defence? And how rare is it for someone to actually ask for a qualitative sociologist? You know? But again, I still had to be able to think, okay, my background's in identity formation. There's some links with defence in terms of warrior identities and masculine identities of soldiers. There was that sort of thing I could, you know, put some of that stuff to practice and apply to. The fatherhood one was a bit more of a stretch, you know, and the prostate cancer one was even more of a stretch. But you know, it's actually about selling your methodologies. What are your skill sets that are going to be valuable to the employer? And, you know, in my case, I didn't have to educate necessarily the interview panel, because one of the people on the panel was a sociologist and they wanted a qualitative sociologist. But you need to go in there prepared to say, how important are my skill sets to help you get done what you need done to address your issues and your questions. That'd be the main thing I would say. So it's actually my methodology is what came in use in that instance. And we're willing to have a serious think about how you can brand yourself and sell yourself to would-be employers who may not know nothing about sociology. What would you say then if someone asked you, what can a sociologist do? Because as I said, a lot of time they think you're a social worker or a Scientologist or some other crazy idea. They don't know. So you need to have a good idea in your head to help them. Not that I've got anything against Scientologists, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, hi Stephen. I suspect this question might be relevant to some of the other presentations today as well, but I recently had a phone call from a friend of mine who's just sort of started working in the industry, working in South Australian State Services SA and stuff. And she's been asked to do a bunch of research and sort of, she rang me and said, what about ethics? What do I do about this? She's been told by her employer, we don't need ethics, don't worry about it, run with it. Now she's doing some research that's going to be raising some kind of ethically dodgy sort of questions that I can foresee having some issues there. I guess my suggestion to her might have been, you know, maybe you should need to combine your ethics with your methodology and have your own sort of ethical guidelines that you run with as a researcher, as I think we all kind of should. I think the microphone, oh no, here we go. I just wondered what it's like in the Defence Force, whether there's an ethics board or an ethics sort of committee that you have to sort of pass things by, or whether you just sort of adapt your own things like in the sort of state government example. We
have an internal ethics review process in place. If it involves any sort of clinical trials and those sort of things, where it's we have a well, there's one what's almost like a quality assurance risk assessment, which if it isn't deemed to be too invasive, you're not after swabs or samples or, you know, damaging participants, then you'd have to go through the NHRMC, the acronyms, not, you know, working defence, I think I know the acronyms. You go through those sort of things, but we have our internal one for those low risk activities, so they still go through a review process. We still have to put forward our methodologies and how we handle participants, because a question still may elicit some kind of negative response. What are you going to do about it? So we have those ethics in place. That said, it's interesting when we, you know, because we have consent forms and information sheets for participants, but sometimes some of the participants still get, they call it in the army, stabbed. So we go there saying we need 30 participants, and sometimes on the day someone will get tapped on the shoulder, you, in there you go, that's their stabbing, going to participate. But then we still explain, you know, you have the right to participate or not. Please, if you're willing to participate, even though the commanding officer suggested that they do participate, you know, you please read the information, consider this, here's the consent form, any further questions, here's the ethics panel, and those sorts of things. So, and some do exercise their right not to participate, even in those instances. So, but as I said, it's great for a sample. We are guaranteed a sample. Not like when I did my PhD, you know, I was putting out flyers around the place looking for dads, and, you know, you're going to talk about your experience of father, all those sort of things. So we've always got a sample there for us, which is handy.
Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it due to time. Please thanks Dr. Steve.